The auctioneer's gavel struck the wooden podium with a crack that echoed through the dusty plaza of Socorro, New Mexico. And Amelia Patterson felt her entire world shatter into 1,000 irretrievable pieces as her father's ranch, the only home she had ever known, was declared sold to the highest bidder on that scorching afternoon in July of 1882. She stood frozen among the crowd of onlookers, her worn cotton dress clinging to her skin in the oppressive heat, watching as Marcus Whitley, the banker who had orchestrated this entire nightmare, smiled with smug satisfaction while accepting congratulations from his associates. The Patterson Ranch, 500 acres of prime grazing land with water rights to the Rio Grande, had been in her family for 30 years. Her father, Thomas Patterson, had built it from nothing, starting with just 20 head of cattle, and a dream that had sustained him through drought, disease, and the constant threat of Apache raids. He had died 6 months ago, leaving everything to Amelia, his only child, but apparently his will meant nothing when men like Whitley decided they wanted what belonged to someone else. "This is wrong," Amelia said, her voice barely above a whisper at first, then louder as rage built in her chest. "This is my land. My father left it to me. You have no right." Whitley turned to her with a condescending expression that made her blood boil. "Miss Patterson, the law is quite clear. Your father had outstanding debts to my bank, debts that you have failed to repay. The property has been legally foreclosed and sold to satisfy those obligations. I suggest you collect your personal belongings and vacate the premises within the week." "My father never borrowed money from your bank," Amelia protested, stepping forward despite the eyes of the entire town now fixed upon her. "He owned that land free and clear. He told me so himself, showed me the deed." "Then I am afraid your father was either mistaken or deliberately misled you," Whitley replied smoothly. "I have all the documentation proving the debt. Perhaps your father was too proud to tell you the truth about his financial difficulties." The crowd murmured, and Amelia felt hot tears of frustration burning behind her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. Not here, not in front of these people who were already judging her, already deciding that a young woman of 22 had no business trying to run a ranch on her own anyway. She had heard the whispers over the past 6 months, the suggestions that she should sell out and move back east where she belonged, as if 22 years in New Mexico counted for nothing simply because she had been born in Boston before her parents made the journey west. She turned and pushed through the crowd, needing to escape the suffocating press of bodies and the pitying looks that felt worse than outright hostility. Her horse, a bay mare named Copper, waited at the hitching post outside the general store, and Amelia untied her with shaking hands before mounting up. She needed to get back to the ranch, needed to find her father's papers and prove that Whitley was lying. There had to be something, some document that would expose this fraud. The ride back to the ranch took nearly an hour, and by the time Amelia reached the familiar wooden gate with its carved P brand, the sun had begun its descent toward the mountains in the west. The house her father had built stood solid and welcoming, its adobe walls thick enough to keep out the worst of the summer heat and the winter cold. She had been born in the bedroom upstairs, had learned to ride in the corral behind the barn, had buried her mother next to the cottonwood grove when fever took her 8 years ago. Every inch of this land was soaked with Patterson blood and sweat and tears, and the thought of losing it to a charlatan like Whitley made her physically ill. She dismounted and rushed inside, going straight to her father's study, where he had kept all his important documents in a heavy oak desk. She pulled open drawers frantically, searching through papers and letters, but everything was in disarray. Someone had been here, had gone through her father's things. Her heart sank as she realized that anything proving the ranch was paid for in full had likely already been destroyed or stolen. Amelia sank into her father's chair and finally let the tears come, great heaving sobs that shook her entire body. She had never felt so helpless, so utterly alone. Her father had been her anchor, her teacher, her best friend. He had raised her to be strong and independent, to never back down from a challenge. But he had never prepared her for this kind of fight, one that took place in courtrooms and banks rather than on open range. A knock at the door startled her, and she quickly wiped her eyes, trying to compose herself before answering. When she opened the door, she found herself looking up at a tall man in his late 20s with sun-weathered skin and eyes the color of storm clouds. He held his hat in his hands respectfully, and she recognized him as one of the cowboys who worked on the neighboring ranch. "Miss Patterson," he said, his voice a deep rumble that somehow managed to be gentle. "My name is Zachary Slade. I heard what happened in town today, and I wanted to offer my help." Amelia stared at him, suspicious of his motives. In her experience, men did not offer help without expecting something in return. "I do not need charity, Mr. Slade. I am not offering charity," he replied calmly. "I am offering justice. I knew your father, and I know he was an honest man who would never have borrowed money he could not repay. Something about this whole situation does not sit right with me." She studied him more carefully, noting the honest quality in his eyes, the straightforward set of his shoulders. Zachary Slade had a reputation around Socorro as a man of his word, someone who worked hard and stayed out of trouble. He had arrived in the area about 3 years ago and hired on with the Roberts Ranch, quickly proving himself to be one of the best horsemen and cattlemen in the territory. "What kind of help are you offering?" Amelia asked cautiously. "Let me look at your father's papers, see if there is anything that might help your case. I spent 2 years working as a clerk in a law office back in Kansas before I came west. I know my way around legal documents." Amelia hesitated, then stepped back to let him inside. What did she have to lose at this point? Someone has already been through his desk. I think they took anything that might have proved the ranch was paid for. Zachary followed her into the study, his boots heavy on the wooden floor. He surveyed the ransacked desk with a grim expression. "When did this happen?" "I do not know. I have been so busy trying to keep the ranch running that I have not spent much time in here. It could have been any time in the past few months." "Do you remember your father keeping any papers elsewhere? A safe, maybe, or somewhere hidden?" Amelia started to shake her head, then stopped. "Wait. He always kept his most important documents in a metal box that he hid. He never told me where, said it was safer if I did not know in case anyone ever tried to make me tell them." "Smart man," Zachary said. "But if he trusted you with everything else, he might have left you a clue about where to find it. Did he say anything before he died? Give you anything?" She thought back to those final days when her father had been laid up with the illness that eventually took him. He had been in and out of consciousness, sometimes lucid and sometimes rambling. She had sat by his bedside for days, holding his hand and listening to his stories about the early days of the ranch. "He kept talking about the beginning," she said slowly. "About the first day he set foot on this land and knew it was meant to be his. He said I should never forget where it all began." Zachary's eyes lit up. "Show me where that was. The first place he built, the first structure on the property." Amelia led him outside and toward the barn, but then veered off toward what remained of the original line. Shack her father had lived in during the first year. It was little more than a ruin now, the roof partially collapsed and the walls crumbling, but her father had always refused to tear it down completely. "This was it," she said. "He built this with his own hands when he first claimed the land." They picked their way through the debris, Zachary examining every corner and crevice. The floor was dirt, packed hard by 30 years of weather and neglect. He knelt down and began to systematically probe the ground, looking for any sign of disturbance. After nearly 20 minutes, his fingers found the edge of something hard buried in the far corner. "Here," he said, and began to dig with his hands. Amelia dropped down beside him to help, and together they unearthed a metal box about the size of a bread loaf, rusted but still intact. Her hands trembled as she tried the latch and found it locked. "We need to break it open," Zachary said. They carried the box back to the house, and Zachary used a hammer and chisel to break the lock. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth to protect them from moisture, were documents that made Amelia's heart leap with hope. The original deed to the property, showing that Thomas Patterson had purchased the land outright from the territorial government in 1852. A letter from the previous owner of the water rights, signed and witnessed, transferring those rights to Patterson in 1855. And most importantly, a receipt from Whitley's own bank dated 1878, marked paid in full for a loan that Patterson had indeed taken out but had completely repaid 4 years ago. "This is it," Zachary said, his voice tense with excitement. "This proves everything." Whitley must have destroyed the bank's copy of this receipt and created false documents showing the debt was still outstanding. "But will anyone believe us?" Amelia asked, her hope warring with fear. "Whitley is a powerful man in this town. He has connections to the territorial governor." "Then we need to go over his head," Zachary replied. "The circuit judge is due in Socorro next week. We will file a complaint and present this evidence in court. Whitley may have influence, but he cannot stand against facts and documentation." Amelia looked at this man who had appeared out of nowhere to help her, this stranger who had no reason to involve himself in her troubles, and felt something warm unfurl in her chest. "Why are you doing this?" she asked softly. Zachary met her eyes, and she saw something there that made her breath catch. "Because it is the right thing to do," he said. "And because I have watched you for the past 6 months working yourself to exhaustion trying to keep this ranch going, and I have never seen anyone with more courage or determination. You deserve to keep what is yours." She felt heat rise in her cheeks that had nothing to do with the summer temperature. "I do not know how to thank you. Let us win this fight first," he said with a slight smile. "Then you can thank me." Over the next week, Zachary spent every evening at the ranch, going over documents and helping Amelia prepare her case. He had to be at the Roberts Ranch during the day to fulfill his work obligations, but as soon as his duties were done, he rode the 5 miles to the Patterson spread and worked with her until well past dark. They pored over every piece of paper, building an ironclad argument that would prove Whitley's fraud. During those long evenings, Amelia learned more about the man who had become her unexpected champion. Zachary had grown up in Kansas, the youngest son of a wheat farmer who had lost everything to grasshoppers and drought. He had worked various jobs to support his family, including that stint as a law clerk, before deciding to head west in search of better opportunities. He was 28 years old, had never been married, and possessed a quiet strength that Amelia found increasingly attractive. For his part, Zachary found himself captivated by Amelia in ways he had not expected. She was beautiful, certainly, with her dark hair and green eyes, but it was her fierce spirit that truly drew him in. She had a quick mind and a sharp wit, and despite the grief and stress she was under, she never gave up or gave in to despair. She spoke knowledgeably about cattle breeding and water management, could read a brand book as easily as a novel, and rode like she had been born in the saddle. She was everything he had ever wanted in a woman, and had never thought to find. The day of the hearing arrived with a thunderstorm rolling across the desert, the first rain Sakaro had seen in nearly 2 months. Amelia took it as a good omen as she dressed in her best outfit, a simple but respectable dark blue dress that had belonged to her mother. Zachary arrived early, wearing a clean shirt and vest, his hair still damp from washing. He had borrowed a buggy for the occasion so they could ride into town together without arriving dusty and disheveled. The courthouse was packed when they arrived, word of the case having spread throughout the county. Everyone knew the Pattersons, and many remembered Thomas as a fair dealer and a good neighbor. But they also knew Marcus Whitley and the power he wielded, and most were there to watch what they assumed would be a quick and decisive victory for the banker. Judge Harold Thornton was a stern-faced man in his 60s who had presided over the territorial circuit for nearly 20 years. He had a reputation for being scrupulously fair, but also for having little patience for frivolous cases or attempts to waste his time. Amelia felt her stomach twist with nerves as she took her seat at the plaintiff's table, Zachary beside her for moral support. Whitley sat at the defense table with his lawyer, a slick-looking man named Pemberton, who had come all the way from Santa Fe for the case. They both looked supremely confident, and why would they not? They believed all evidence to the contrary had been destroyed. Judge Thornton called the court to order and read out the case. Miss Amelia Patterson versus Marcus Whitley and the First Bank of Sakaro, regarding the foreclosure and sale of the Patterson Ranch. Miss Patterson, you are claiming that the foreclosure was fraudulent. Amelia stood, her legs shaky but her voice clear. Yes, Your Honor. I am claiming that the debt my property was foreclosed for never existed, or rather, that it was paid in full years ago. Mr. Whitley has presented false documents to steal my land. A murmur ran through the courtroom, and Whitley's face turned an ugly shade of red. Your Honor, this is absurd. I have all the proper documentation proving the debt. Then we will review that documentation, Judge Thornton said calmly. Mr. Pemberton, present your evidence. The lawyer stood and laid out a series of papers that purported to show a loan Thomas Patterson had taken from the bank in 1878 for the sum of $5,000, secured against the ranch property. The papers showed regular interest payments, but claimed the principal had never been repaid. It all looked very official and convincing. When Pemberton finished, Judge Thornton turned to Amelia. Miss Patterson, what evidence do you have to contradict these documents? Zachary helped her lay out the papers they had found in the metal box, and Amelia explained how they had discovered them hidden in the ruins of the original line shack. She presented the receipt marked paid in full, dated and signed by a bank clerk named Henderson who had worked for Whitley 4 years ago. Your Honor, Pemberton interjected smoothly, this receipt could easily have been forged. There is no way to verify its authenticity, particularly since Mr. Henderson left the bank's employ years ago and has since passed away. How convenient that Miss Patterson produces this document only now, after the foreclosure has been completed. Amelia felt her hope faltering, but Zachary stood up. Your Honor, if I may, I would like to point out several discrepancies in the bank's documentation that suggest it is their papers which are fraudulent, not ours. Judge Thornton leaned back in his chair. You are not a lawyer, Mr. Slade. What standing do you have to analyze these documents? I worked as a law clerk for 2 years in Kansas, Your Honor, and I have made a thorough study of these papers. If you will allow me to explain, I believe I can prove that the bank's loan documents were created recently, not in 1878 as they claim. The judge considered this for a moment, then nodded. Very well, proceed. Zachary approached the bench with both sets of documents and began his presentation. He pointed out that the ink used on the bank's loan papers was a shade that had not been commercially available in 1878, but had only come into common use in the past 2 years. He showed how the paper itself bore a watermark from a mill that had not existed until 1880. He demonstrated that the signature supposedly belonging to Thomas Patterson did not match the signature on the verified deed and other authentic documents. Furthermore, Zachary continued, gaining confidence as he saw Judge Thornton leaning forward with interest, I took the liberty of contacting the Territorial Records Office in Santa Fe. They confirmed that no mortgage or lien against the Patterson property has ever been filed, which would be required by law if such a substantial loan had been made against the property. The courtroom erupted in noise, and Judge Thornton had to bang his gavel repeatedly to restore order. Whitley was on his feet, his face purple with rage. This is ridiculous. Are you going to take the word of some drifter cowboy over a respected banker? I am going to follow the evidence, Mr. Whitley, Judge Thornton said coldly. And right now the evidence is looking very bad for you. Mr. Pemberton, do you have any explanation for these discrepancies? The lawyer looked shaken, shuffling through his papers frantically. Your Honor, I was provided these documents by my client and had no reason to question their authenticity. Then perhaps you should have questioned them, the judge said sharply. He turned to Whitley. Mr. Whitley, I am giving you one opportunity to explain yourself before I rule on this case. Did you or did you not create false documents in order to fraudulently foreclose on the Patterson ranch? For a long moment, Whitley said nothing, his jaw working as he clearly tried to decide whether to continue the lie or come clean. Finally, his shoulders sagged. The ranch should have been mine, he said bitterly. Thomas Patterson had no right to that land. My father wanted to buy it 30 years ago, but Patterson got there first. He always threw his success in our faces, lording his good fortune over everyone else. When he died and left it to some girl who could not possibly manage it properly, I saw an opportunity to finally claim what should have belonged to my family from the start. The courtroom exploded again, but this time Judge Thornton let the noise continue for a few moments before restoring order. His expression was one of disgust as he looked at Whitley. So you admit to fraud, forgery, and theft. Mr. Whitley, I am hereby ruling that the foreclosure and sale of the Patterson Ranch were obtained through fraudulent means and are therefore null and void. The property is to be immediately returned to Miss Patterson, along with any proceeds from the attempted sale. Amelia felt tears streaming down her face, but this time they were tears of relief and joy. Zachary's hand found hers under the table and squeezed gently. Furthermore, Judge Thornton continued, I am ordering that Mr. Whitley be held for trial on criminal charges of fraud and forgery. Bailiff, take him into custody. The courtroom descended into chaos as the bailiff moved to arrest Whitley, who began shouting about his connections and how this was not over. Pemberton gathered his papers and made a hasty exit, clearly wanting no further association with his disgraced client. People crowded around Amelia to offer congratulations and support, many apologizing for not standing up for her sooner. Through it all, Zachary remained at her side, his steady presence anchoring her as she struggled to process everything that had just happened. When they finally managed to extract themselves from the courthouse and climb back into the borrowed buggy, Amelia turned to him with shining eyes. You saved me, she said simply. You saved my home, my future, everything. Zachary looked at her with an intensity that made her heart race. I could not stand by and watch you lose something that was rightfully yours. Your father built that ranch with his own hands, and you have every right to continue his legacy. Come back to the ranch with me, Amelia said impulsively. Let me make you dinner at least. It is the least I can do. The ride back to the ranch seemed to take forever and no time at all. The storm had passed, leaving the desert air cool and fresh, the scent of rain-soaked sage filling the evening. When they arrived, Amelia busied herself in the kitchen while Zachary tended to the horses, and for the first time in months, she felt truly at peace. They ate dinner on the porch, watching the last light fade from the sky and the stars emerge one by one. The conversation flowed easily, moving from the case to memories of their childhoods to dreams for the future. Amelia found herself telling Zachary things she had never told anyone, and he reciprocated with stories of his own struggles and hopes. "What will you do now?" Zachary asked as they sat in companionable silence after the meal. "Will you keep running the ranch on your own?" "I have to," Amelia replied. "It is all I have, all I know, but it is hard work, harder than I ever realized when my father was alive to shoulder most of the burden. I need to hire on some hands, but I do not have much money to pay wages." Zachary was quiet for a moment, then said carefully, "I could help you. I could quit my job at the Roberts place and come work for you instead." Amelia's heart leaped, but she forced herself to be practical. "I cannot afford to pay you what Roberts does. He has one of the biggest spreads in the territory." "I am not worried about the money," Zachary said, turning to face her. The moonlight cast shadows across his face, making him look almost ethereal. "These past weeks, working with you, getting to know you, have been the happiest I have been since I came to New Mexico. I would rather work for less money doing something that matters with someone I care about than collect top wages at a place where I am just another hired hand." "Someone you care about," Amelia whispered, barely daring to believe what she was hearing. Zachary reached out and gently tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, his fingers lingering against her cheek. "I think I started falling for you the first time I saw you in town, about a year ago. You were selling cattle and drove a harder bargain than most men twice your age. You were magnificent. But I never had the courage to approach you, figured you would never look twice at a simple cowboy. Then when I heard what Whitley was doing to you, I knew I had to help, even if it meant just being your friend. But Amelia, I do not want to be just your friend. I want to be so much more." Amelia felt like her heart might burst. "I want that too," she admitted. "These past weeks with you have shown me what I have been missing. You are kind and smart and honorable, and you treated me like an equal when everyone else saw me as just some foolish girl playing at ranching. I think I love you, Zachary Slade." His smile was like the sun breaking through clouds. "I know I love you, Amelia Patterson." He leaned in slowly, giving her plenty of time to pull away if she wanted, but pulling away was the last thing on her mind. Their lips met in a kiss that was gentle at first, then deepened as weeks of suppressed emotion finally found release. When they finally broke apart, both were breathless. "Stay," Amelia said urgently. "Not just for dinner, I mean stay here at the ranch. Help me build something real. We can be partners in every sense of the word." "Are you proposing to me?" Zachary asked with a teasing glint in his eye. Amelia blushed but did not back down. "Maybe I am. Women have the right to speak their minds out here, and my mind is telling me that I have found the man I want to spend my life with. So yes, Zachary Slade, I am asking you to marry me." Zachary threw back his head and laughed, a sound of pure joy that echoed across the ranch. "Then my answer is yes, Amelia Patterson. Yes, I will marry you. Yes, I will help you run this ranch. Yes to everything now and forever." They sealed the promise with another kiss, this one longer and deeper, full of passion and commitment and hope for the future. When they finally went inside, it was late, and they reluctantly agreed that Zachary should ride back to the Roberts ranch to give notice and collect his belongings. He promised to return the next day and never leave again. True to his word, Zachary arrived the following afternoon with everything he owned packed onto his horse. He moved into the small room off the kitchen that had once belonged to the ranch foreman, and they began the work of rebuilding the Patterson ranch together. Within a week, word had spread about how Zachary had helped Amelia win her case, and several of the cowboys who had once worked for her father came asking for their old jobs back. With a small crew assembled, the ranch began to thrive again. Zachary proved to be an excellent foreman, organizing the men efficiently and handling the day-to-day operations while still consulting Amelia on every major decision. She appreciated that he never tried to take over or push her aside, always making sure that everyone knew she was the owner and final authority. Their respect for each other deepened into something even stronger as they worked side by side through the hot summer and into fall. They were married in October, in a simple ceremony at the small church in Socorro. Half the town turned out to celebrate, many people who had ignored Amelia's plight now eager to be part of her happiness. She wore her mother's wedding dress, carefully preserved in a trunk, and Zachary wore a new suit that he had saved up for months to buy. Judge Thornton, who had become something of a friend after the trial, officiated the ceremony with great solemnity and genuine warmth. The reception was held at the ranch, with tables set up under the cottonwoods and a fiddler playing music late into the night. People danced and ate and drank, and Amelia felt surrounded by love and support in a way she had not since her father's death. Whitley, she had heard, was serving time in the territorial prison for his crimes, his bank having been taken over by new management. It was a satisfying end to that chapter of her life. As the last guests departed and the stars wheeled overhead, Zachary swept Amelia into his arms and carried her across the threshold of the house that was now truly theirs. "Welcome home, Mrs. Slade," he murmured against her hair. "I've been home all along," Amelia replied, wrapping her arms around his neck. "But now it is perfect." Their wedding night was tender and passionate, a culmination of months of longing and restraint. They explored each other with gentle hands and whispered words, learning the landscape of each other's bodies as thoroughly as they knew every acre of the ranch. When they finally fell asleep in each other's arms, both were smiling, secure in the knowledge that they had found something rare and precious. The years that followed were not always easy, but they were good. The ranch prospered under their combined management, and they slowly expanded their holdings, buying adjoining land when it became available. They remained active in the Socorro community, Amelia serving on the town council, and Zachary helping to organize a cattlemen's association that protected the interests of smaller ranchers against larger operations. Their first child, a son they named Thomas after Amelia's father, was born in the summer of 1884, arriving during a thunderstorm much like the one that had marked the day of the trial. Zachary proved to be a devoted father, doting on the boy while still maintaining his responsibilities to the ranch. Amelia balanced motherhood with running the business, often conducting meetings with buyers while nursing Thomas, much to the shock of more traditional members of society. 2 years later, twin daughters arrived, whom they named Sarah and Catherine. The house that had felt so empty after her father's death now rang with children's laughter and the chaos of family life. Zachary added on to the house, building extra bedrooms and a larger kitchen, always consulting with Amelia about the designs and making sure everything met her approval. As the children grew, both parents made sure to teach them the value of hard work and honest dealing. Thomas learned to ride almost before he could walk, following his father around the ranch and absorbing everything like a sponge. The twins were equally adventurous, refusing to be left behind just because they were girls. Amelia saw herself in their fierce independence and encouraged them to learn everything their brother learned. In 1890, when Thomas was 6 and the twins were 4, Amelia discovered she was pregnant again. This pregnancy was more difficult than the previous ones, and she was forced to spend the last 2 months on bed rest. Zachary was beside himself with worry, barely leaving her side except when ranch business absolutely demanded it. The older children tiptoed around the house, trying to be helpful and good. When labor finally began on a cold January night in 1891, it was long and arduous. Zachary held Amelia's hand through every contraction, whispering encouragement and love. The midwife from town worked tirelessly, and finally, as dawn broke over the mountains, another son entered the world. They named him James, and while he was smaller than his siblings had been, he was healthy and strong. 4 children, Amelia marveled as she held the baby while the older 3 crowded around to see their new brother. We have created quite a legacy. Not we, Zachary corrected gently. You are the heart of this family, the reason all of this exists. I am just lucky enough to be part of it. But Amelia shook her head. No, we did this together. I could never have survived without you, let alone built all this. We are partners, remember? In everything. As the children grew older, the story of how their parents met and fell in love became a favorite bedtime tale. They never tired of hearing about the evil banker who tried to steal the ranch, and how their brave father had helped their mother prove the land was rightfully hers. It became part of the family mythology, a reminder that justice and love could triumph over greed and corruption. The ranch continued to prosper through the 1890s, surviving droughts and hard winters through careful management and the strong partnership between Amelia and Zachary. They became pillars of the Socorro community, known for their fair dealings and their willingness to help neighbors in need. When other ranchers fell on hard times, Amelia often remembered her own desperate situation and extended generous terms for loans or partnerships. In 1895, when statehood was being seriously discussed for New Mexico, Amelia was approached about running for the territorial legislature. She declined, saying her place was on the ranch with her family, but she did agree to serve as an unofficial advisor on issues affecting ranchers and women's property rights. Her testimony before various committees helped shape laws that made it easier for women to own and manage property in their own right. Zachary took great pride in his wife's growing influence and reputation, never showing a hint of jealousy or resentment at being known as Amelia Patterson's husband, rather than the other way around. He had always known he had married an exceptional woman, and he was content to support her however he could while managing the practical day-to-day operations of the ranch. The children flourished in this environment of mutual respect and partnership. Thomas grew into a serious young man with his mother's business sense and his father's steady reliability. The twins were inseparable, both showing aptitude for both ranch work and academics. James, the youngest, had a wild streak that kept his parents on their toes but also a tender heart that melted everyone who met him. In 1898, as the Spanish-American War broke out, Thomas, now 14, talked eagerly about enlisting when he came of age. Both Amelia and Zachary firmly told him he was needed at home, but privately they worried about the patriotic fervor sweeping the nation and what it might mean for their children's futures. Thankfully, the war ended quickly, and Thomas's enthusiasm for military life faded. The turn of the century found the Slade family healthy, prosperous, and happy. The ranch now encompassed over 1,000 acres and supported several hundred head of cattle. They had built a reputation for quality stock, and buyers came from all over the territory to purchase their animals. The house had been expanded twice more and was now a sprawling, comfortable home filled with love and laughter. On New Year's Day of 1900, Amelia stood on the porch watching the sun rise over her land, Zachary's arms wrapped around her from behind. "We have been together 18 years, she said softly. "Can you believe it? Best 18 years of my life," Zachary replied, resting his chin on top of her head. "Though I have to admit, when I knocked on your door that day in 1882, I never imagined all of this." "What did you imagine?" Amelia asked, turning in his arms to face him. "Honestly, I just wanted to help you. I had no grand plan beyond that. But then I got to know you and I fell completely in love, and suddenly I was imagining everything. A life with you, children, growing old together. All the things I had thought I would never have. You gave me back my life when you helped me fight Whitley," Amelia said, reaching up to cup his weathered face in her hands. "But more than that, you gave me a partner, a lover, a best friend. You gave me a family. I cannot imagine my life without you in it." "You will never have to," Zachary promised, kissing her softly. "I am yours for as long as I draw breath." They stood together in the growing light, two people who had found each other against the odds and built something lasting and true. Behind them in the house, their children were beginning to stir, ready to face a new century with all its challenges and opportunities. The ranch that Amelia had fought so hard to keep would pass to the next generation, and the story of how their parents met would continue to be told, a testament to courage, justice, and enduring love. As the years continued to pass, the Slade family remained close-knit, despite the inevitable changes that time brought. In 1903, Thomas left home to attend the School of Mines in Socorro, planning to study geology and engineering. While part of Amelia mourned the loss of her firstborn from the daily life of the ranch, she was proud of his ambition and intelligence. He came home every weekend, often bringing friends who were fascinated by the ranch and the story of his remarkable parents. The twins, Sarah and Catherine, now teenagers, had developed distinct personalities despite their identical appearance. Sarah was passionate about horses and spent every spare moment training and breeding them, developing a line of quality ranch horses that became almost as famous as the cattle. Catherine, meanwhile, discovered a talent for bookkeeping and business management, taking over more and more of the ranch's financial operations from her mother. James, the youngest at 12, was already showing signs of being the best horseman in the family, with a natural gift for understanding and working with animals. He also had his father's calm temperament and his mother's fierce determination, a combination that promised great things for his future. Zachary, now in his late 40s, had aged well, his hair touched with silver at the temples, but his body still strong and capable from years of hard physical work. He and Amelia had settled into a comfortable partnership that had only deepened with time, able to communicate with a look or a gesture born of decades of shared experience. They still made time for each other, stealing quiet moments on the porch in the evenings or riding out together to check on distant parts of the ranch. In 1905, tragedy struck when a fire broke out in the barn during a particularly dry summer. Zachary led the effort to save the animals, managing to get all the horses and most of the equipment out before the structure was fully engulfed. He suffered burns on his arms and smoke inhalation, spending several anxious days in bed while Amelia nursed him back to health. The barn was rebuilt stronger than before, with Thomas coming home from school to help with the design. incorporating better fire breaks and ventilation. The incident reminded everyone how fragile life could be and brought the family even closer together. Thomas announced that after graduation, he would be returning to the ranch permanently, wanting to apply his new knowledge to improve their operations. The twins, now 17, had both decided they wanted to stay as well, neither interested in the traditional path of marriage and leaving home that society expected of young women. "We are building something important here," Sarah said one evening at dinner. "Why would we want to leave?" "This ranch has been in our family for over 50 years, Catherine added. "It will take all of us to keep it going and growing." Amelia looked around the table at her family, her heart full to bursting. This was what she and Zachary had built together, not just a successful business but a legacy of strength, independence, and unity. Her father would have been so proud to see what his only daughter had accomplished. As New Mexico moved closer to statehood, which finally occurred in 1912, the Slades were at the forefront of the political and economic changes sweeping the territory. Amelia was invited to speak at the Constitutional Convention about property rights and the role of women in the new state. Her testimony, drawing on her own experiences fighting to keep her land, helped ensure that New Mexico's Constitution included some of the most progressive property laws in the nation. By 1910, Thomas had indeed returned to the ranch and married a schoolteacher named Elizabeth from Santa Fe. They built a house on the eastern part of the property and started their own family, with the first grandchild, a girl named Amelia after her grandmother, arriving in 1911. The twins remained unmarried by choice, both deeply involved in running the ranch and content with their lives as they were. James, at 19, had become the ranch's chief wrangler, his skill with horses unmatched in the county. He had a sweetheart, the daughter of the neighboring Roberts family, and everyone expected an engagement announcement soon. Zachary, now 56, had finally agreed to step back from some of the harder physical work, turning over more responsibility to Thomas and James. He still rode out every day, but now as a supervisor rather than a laborer. He and Amelia spent more time together, often taking long rides just the two of them, exploring parts of the ranch they had not visited in years. "You ever regret it?" Amelia asked him one afternoon as they sat by the creek that marked the southern boundary of their land. "Giving up your own dreams to help me with mine." Zachary looked at her in genuine surprise. "What dreams did I give up? Being a hired hand somewhere, working for wages my whole life." "Amelia, you gave me dreams I never knew I could have. A home, a family, a purpose. I would not change a single day of the past 28 years, even the hard times," she pressed. "The droughts, the fires, the struggles, especially the hard times," he said firmly. "Because we faced them together and came through stronger. That day I knocked on your door and offered to help. I had no idea I was beginning the greatest adventure of my life. Falling in love with you, earning your trust, building this family, it has all been more than I ever dreamed possible." Amelia leaned against his shoulder, still fitting perfectly into the curve of his arm after all these years. "I think about that day sometimes, about what would have happened if you had not come. I would have lost everything. The ranch, my future, my hope. You saved me in every way a person can be saved." "You saved yourself," Zachary corrected. "You found those documents, you had the courage to fight. I just helped you prove what you already knew was true." "We saved each other," Amelia said finally, "and we built something beautiful." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the water flow past. Two people who had started as strangers and become inseparable. Around them, the land that Amelia's father had claimed 6 decades ago stretched in all directions, fertile and productive under the stewardship of the family she and Zachary had created. In 1914, when World War I broke out in Europe, the Slades watched anxiously as the conflict escalated, worried that America would eventually be drawn in. Thomas was now too old and settled with a family to worry about enlisting, but James was prime military age. When America entered the war in 1917, James did indeed volunteer, driven by the same sense of duty and honor his parents had instilled in him. The year he was overseas was the hardest Amelia and Zachary had faced since the fight with Whitley. Every day brought anxiety about whether James was safe, whether he would come home. They threw themselves into war work, helping with bond drives and supporting other families with men in service. The ranch contributed beef to feed the troops, and Sarah trained horses for the cavalry. When James finally returned in 1919, whole and healthy if somewhat changed by his experiences, the celebration on the ranch was second only to the parties that had marked statehood. He married his sweetheart, Rose Roberts, within a month of his return, and they too built a house on the ranch, determined to stay close to family. The 1920s brought prosperity and change to the ranch and to America as a whole. The Slades adapted to new technologies, buying their first truck and eventually installing electricity in the main house. But they never lost sight of the values that had built their success: hard work, honest dealing, and family loyalty. Amelia and Zachary, now in their 60s, gradually transitioned into the role of matriarch and patriarch, advising the younger generation but letting them make most of the decisions. They had earned their rest, though neither was content to be completely idle. They still rode out together most mornings, checking on the land they loved, visiting with grandchildren, and simply enjoying each other's company. On a warm evening in June of 1925, as they celebrated their 43rd wedding anniversary with the entire extended family, Amelia raised a glass for a toast. 43 years ago, she said, her voice still strong despite her age, I stood in a courtroom and fought for what was mine. I won that fight because of the man standing beside me, the man who believed in justice and in me when I had almost given up hope. Zachary Slade, you are the best decision I ever made, and I would choose you again every single day. Zachary's eyes were bright with emotion as he responded, and I would choose you, Amelia. From that first moment I decided to help you, through every challenge we faced, every joy we celebrated. I have never doubted that you are my home, my heart, my everything. The family cheered and applauded, and as Amelia and Zachary kissed to seal the toast, their children and grandchildren saw what true love looked like, tested by time and triumph, strengthened by struggle and success. It was a legacy more valuable than land or cattle, a gift that would pass through generations. As the party continued into the night, with music and dancing and stories both old and new, Amelia looked around at the empire they had built together. The ranch now covered over 2,000 acres and supported hundreds of head of cattle and horses. 3 generations of Slades called it home, each contributing their own gifts and talents to its success. The house her father had built with his own hands had been expanded and improved, but still stood solid at the heart of it all, a testament to his vision and determination. But more important than the physical success was the family they had created, bound by love and respect and shared purpose. Every person gathered here tonight was a testament to what she and Zachary had built together, to the choice they had made to face life as partners in every sense of the word. As if reading her thoughts, Zachary squeezed her hand. "What are you thinking about?" "Everything," Amelia replied with a soft smile. "The past, the present, the future. How a single moment of courage can change the course of a life. If you had not knocked on my door that day, none of this would exist. Fate, Zachary said simply. I believe we were meant to find each other, meant to build this together. Some things are just destined. Then I am grateful to fate, Amelia said, resting her head on his shoulder. And to you, for having the courage to reach out to a desperate woman and offer help with no thought of reward. Oh, I was rewarded beyond measure, Zachary assured her. Every day with you has been a gift. They sat together as the stars came out, surrounded by family and love, two souls who had found each other at just the right moment and built something that would endure long after they were gone. The ranch that Amelia had fought so hard to save would pass to their children and grandchildren, and beyond, each generation adding their own chapter to the story. But the heart of that story would always be the same. A young woman accused of stealing what was rightfully hers, and a cowboy who proved her ownership in court, and in doing so, won her heart. It was a love story forged in struggle and sealed in triumph, and it would echo through the generations as long as Slades walked the land of the Patterson Ranch. As the years continued to roll forward, Amelia and Zachary remained active in the life of the ranch well into their 70s, though they finally yielded most of the operational control to the younger generation. Thomas proved to be an excellent manager, combining his engineering knowledge with his ranching heritage to make innovative improvements. Sarah's breeding program had made the ranch famous throughout the Southwest for quality horses. Catherine managed the finances with shrewd intelligence, ensuring continued prosperity even during economic downturns. And James, his war years behind him, became known as one of the finest cattlemen in New Mexico, his judgment trusted throughout the industry. The grandchildren were numerous now, a dozen strong by 1930, and Amelia delighted in watching them grow. She saw echoes of her father in some, glimpses of Zachary in others, and traces of herself in their fierce independence and love of the land. Each child was taught the story of how the ranch was nearly stolen, how their great-grandmother had fought back, and how their great-grandfather had stood beside her. It became part of their identity, a reminder that justice and courage mattered, that family stood together, that what was right was worth fighting for. Zachary's health began to fail in his late 70s, his body finally showing the wear of decades of hard physical labor. He bore it with characteristic stoicism, never complaining, still insisting on riding out to survey the ranch even when it cost him considerable pain. Amelia stayed close to him, their bond as strong as ever, perhaps even stronger in the face of mortality. On a clear spring morning in 1933, Zachary told Amelia he wanted to ride out to the old line shack one more time, the place where they had found the metal box that saved her ranch and changed both their lives. Despite her concerns about his strength, Amelia agreed, and they rode out together slowly, taking their time, stopping often to rest and remember. When they reached the ruins, now even more collapsed than they had been 51 years earlier, they dismounted carefully and stood together, looking at the spot where they had dug up the proof of Amelia's ownership. "This place changed everything," Zachary said softly. "Your father was a wise man to hide those papers here, and you were brilliant to figure out where they might be," Amelia replied, holding his hand tightly. "That day, that discovery, it set everything in motion. No regrets." Zachary asked, turning to look at her with those storm-gray eyes that age had not dimmed. "Not a single one," Amelia said firmly. "Every moment with you has been exactly what I wanted, what I needed. You gave me back my home and gave me a family. You stood beside me through everything life threw at us. How could I possibly regret any of that?" Zachary smiled, that same warm smile that had first captured her heart so many decades ago. "Good. Because I want you to know, Amelia Slade, that loving you has been the greatest privilege and joy of my life. Whatever happens, wherever we go from here, that will never change." They stood together in the warm spring sunshine, two people who had weathered every storm life could throw at them and emerged stronger for it. When they finally rode back to the main house, it was slowly, savoring every moment together. Zachary passed away peacefully in his sleep 3 weeks later, surrounded by family, his hand clasped in Amelia's. He was 79 years old and had lived a full, meaningful life. The grief that swept through the ranch and indeed through all of Socorro was profound, for Zachary Slade had been respected and loved by everyone who knew him. Amelia, now 73, felt as though part of her soul had been torn away. For 51 years, Zachary had been her partner, her love, her best friend. The thought of continuing without him seemed almost impossible. But she was surrounded by the family they had built together, and in their faces she saw his legacy, his strength, his kindness. He lived on in them, in the ranch, in everything they had created together. She buried him in the cottonwood grove next to her parents, and the entire county turned out for the funeral. Story after story was told of Zachary's fairness, his generosity, his quiet strength. But the story everyone remembered best was how he had helped a desperate young woman fight for her land, and how that single act of courage and kindness had blossomed into a love that became legendary. Amelia lived for another 7 years, remaining sharp and engaged until the very end. She spent her time with grandchildren and great-grandchildren, passing on the stories and values that had sustained her through a long and remarkable life. She never remarried, never even considered it, for as she told anyone who asked, her heart belonged to Zachary and always would. On a warm summer evening in 1940, surrounded by 3 generations of the family she and Zachary had created, Amelia Patterson Slade passed away peacefully at the age of 80. Her last words were, "I am coming, Zachary," and those who were present said she smiled as she spoke them, as if she could already see him waiting for her. They buried her next to Zachary in the cottonwood grove, and the entire state mourned the passing of one of New Mexico's most remarkable women. She had lived through the rough and tumble days of the frontier, had fought for and won her right to her land, had built a dynasty that continued to thrive, and had loved one man with absolute devotion for more than half a century. The ranch continued on, passed down through the generations, each adding their own chapter to the story, but never forgetting the foundation on which it all rested. The metal box that had held the crucial documents was preserved and displayed in the main house, a tangible reminder of the day everything changed. The story of Amelia and Zachary, of the accusation and the trial and the love that grew from justice served, was told and retold until it became part of the fabric of Socorro itself. Even now, more than a century after that fateful day in 1882, when a young woman stood in a plaza and watched her world fall apart, the Patterson Ranch, still bearing its original name despite generations of Slades, thrives in New Mexico. The descendants of Amelia and Zachary still work the land, still raise cattle and horses, still honor the values of hard work, honest dealing, and family loyalty that built their legacy. And sometimes, on warm summer evenings when the light slants golden across the land, people say they can see 2 figures riding together across the range, a man and a woman who found each other when both needed the other most, who fought for what was right and built something that would last forever. It is just a legend, of course, the kind of romantic story that every old ranch accumulates over the years, but the love was real, The courage was real, the legacy was real, and that, in the end, is what truly matters. The story of how she was accused of stealing what was already hers, and how the cowboy proved her ownership in court, and how they fell in love and built an empire together, is more than just history. It is a testament to the power of justice, the strength of partnership, and the enduring nature of true love. It is a reminder that sometimes, in the midst of despair, help comes from unexpected places, and a single act of courage can change not just one life, but generations to come.